Okay, so we are picking up in chapter 7, Mishnah 5, which I know after a month of absence, there may be a few cobwebs for what we were talking about. So a brief reminder, we're talking about theft. And in particular, when it comes to stealing sheep and cows, there is a special penalty of a 4- or 5-fold restitution. In addition to the normal double payback, if you have either slaughtered or sold the animal that you stole, right? So if you've still got the animal and you just give it back to the person you stole it from, then you pay a normal penalty. But if you've slaughtered or sold the animal and it's gone, then you have to pay a special premium penalty, right? The elite penalty. So that is important to keep in our mind, is that we're talking about, we have a normal penalty for theft and then a bonus penalty if it has been slaughtered or sold. Good? Good, because without that in mind, the next two Mishnayot are not going to make any sense. So, chapter 7, Mishnah 5. Do I have any reading volunteers? Yes? I know you read, dramatic Torah, so well, but this is law code, so I didn't want to speak for you.
So, Mishnah 5, number 1.
Number 1.
If he sold it all but 100th part.
All right. So I'm going to interrupt you a lot for this one.
Absolutely.
Right? Excuse me. That's a phone call that can go to voicemail. Let me just turn my volume off. Come on. Volume. There we go.
He sold it all but 100th part.
All right. So, like I said in the little intro, if he sells it or if he slaughters it, he's in trouble, right? Bonus trouble, I should say. He's already stolen it. He's in trouble. But if he sells or he slaughters it, he's in bonus trouble. But here the question is, what if I have sold 99% of the cow, but I haven't sold the last 100th, of a cow? 1% of a cow. Right, so that's the if that we're dealing with here. I've already sold off 99% of the cow, so I've got like a foot left. Okay, that's the if. Keep going.
Or if he had already a share in it.
That means he already owned part of the cow. For example, they like a co-op. So he and the other people had said, oh, we'll each put in $50, and then when we kill the cow, we'll each get some out of it. And then he steals the cow before it was slaughtered. Well, he technically already owned part of the cow, and he only stole the rest of the cow, right? That's what we're dealing with in that if. Or
if he slaughtered it and it became unfit to eat by his own hand.
That is to say that he has done the slaughtering incorrectly, right? So does that really count as slaughtering if he can't actually eat the animal? Right? That's not slaughter, that's just killing.
Or if he pierced the windpipe or rooted out its gullet, he makes 2-fold restitution, but not 4- or 5-fold restitution.
Right. So again, if he makes it non-kosher in these other ways, for all of these cases, he doesn't trip the line to be slaughter or sell the additional 4 or 5 times. Instead, he pays the regular 2-time penalty for having stolen the animal. Does that make sense? It's a little confusing there, yes? Right, so the question that's happening here, which is very similar to many other questions in Jewish law, well, really any type of law, which is, what % of the deed do you have to do to actually do the deed? There's some, I did a little, but not enough to really cause it to be a full-on, the full level of the higher crime. So let me give you an example maybe from American law, or at least vaguely, because I don't know American law perfectly. I've never claimed to be a lawyer, right? In America, we have something called theft and we have something called grand theft, right? What's the difference?
The amount.
The amount, right? So if I steal $5 from someone, is it the same crime as if I steal 5,000 from someone? No, I'm pretty sure grand theft is around the 5,000 mark or so, where it becomes a different level of punishment and a different level of criminality. You know, it can go from being a misdemeanor to being a felony and things like that. So if let's imagine, for the sake of argument and my own embarrassing lack of American law, let's imagine the threshold is $5,000, right? If it's $5, it's regular theft. If it's $5,000, it's grand theft. What if you stole $4,999.99? 1 penny difference. Which is it?
Well, you have to draw the line someplace. Wherever you draw the line, you're going to go pay less.
Exactly right. You have to draw the line. It would be considered a regular theft, right? Even though the guy next to you who stole $5,000 is now up for a felony charge and bigger time in prison and all of that, because you stole 1 penny less than him, you're not as liable. You're not going to face the same penalties as he did. That's kind of what we're dealing with here, where if you didn't actually sell all of it, or part of it was technically yours, well, then no, you didn't actually commit the crime the Torah was talking about of selling, because selling means the totality was sold, not just a bit of it. And the same thing, if you didn't actually really slaughter it, but just killed it in other ways, well, then you didn't do exactly what the Torah said was the crime, which was to slaughter the animal. And therefore, you only have to pay the normal double compensation for theft. You don't have to pay the special compensation for sale or slaughter. You don't seem happy with that.
I'm not happy with it at all, because you stole my animal.
Yes.
Now,
I'm paying you,
animal.
but I'm paying you back for that.
Except that you say you kept one of the feet, you killed my animal even, and you kept one of the feet. You have to pay me back less. What good does that do me? I'm still out a whole animal.
Correct. Absolutely.
Twice.
What's that? I'm still paying you back double what the animal was worth.
Yeah.
Right. So you're still getting more for the animal than the animal itself is worth.
But if you had not done that, taken a foot away,
if I'd sold all of it,
then
yes.
you would owe me 4 or 5 times as much.
Correct.
Yes.
How do I? That's awful. I'm still out the same animal.
Right.
But if you ripped off a leg before you got it, then you get away with less of a penalty. Makes absolutely no sense.
Because I did less. If I stole $4,999.99, I'm only going to jail for 6 months, and the other guy who stole $5,000 and a penny is going to jail for 12 years, right? Does that make sense?
No.
Right? If you have a line of what the definition of the crime is, and the definition has not been fulfilled, then we have to make sure that the penalty that is exacted is the correct penalty. This is something we've talked about a little bit in different points, but it really bears repeating, because sometimes we forget, and the Mishnah doesn't want us to forget, that the criminal is still a part of our community, right? And the criminal still has rights. In particular, the criminal has the right to his or her own property, right? Why wouldn't they, right? I stole your watch. That doesn't mean I forfeit every right and freedom I ever have. What I do forfeit is the penalty for the deed that I have committed. So depending upon what that deed is, I may have forfeited 2 times that cost. I may have forfeited 4 or 5 times that cost. But if I only did enough to hit that 2 times threshold and not enough to hit the 4 or 5, then how dare the court take more from me? Then the court would be stealing from me.
So we're all concerned about you. We're not concerned about the person who is missing that animal.
Of course we're concerned about them.
And I don't want you back in my community, because if you know that you're going to get less of a penalty, if you take my animal, kill it,
and
but
keep
one of the
foot.
legs, you get less of a penalty. What incentive is there for you not to take another one?
I'm still being penalized double. I'm still paying twice the price of the animal. I could have bought the animal for you for half the cost of what I'm paying in penalty.
If double is so bad, why do we up it to 4 to 5 times? Because you're not going to go there.
We don't up it. God put that penalty in. Right? This was not community legislation. This was not everybody sitting around thinking, what's the best way to deter theft? This was God saying, this is the law. If someone steals your car, they're only paying twice the penalty. Even if they sell it, even if they chop it to bits. It's only if they steal your cow or your sheep that they're paying 4 or 5 times. If you're not a farmer, then you never get that 4 or 5 times penalty. I don't own any sheep. I don't own any cows. I'm never going to get the jackpot by having someone steal it from me. The best I can ever hope for is double the value of the item that they took. And the idea wasn't always to think about how will this deter criminals, but was how do we fulfill what the Torah has commanded? And sometimes what the Torah commands seems strict. Sometimes what the Torah commands seems lenient. Sometimes it seems strict to one person and seems lenient to the other. And sometimes those same two people may feel it very much the different. But the sages were very aware that they didn't have the authority to take more than the Torah told them they were allowed to take as a penalty. And that's still something in American law, I know, that is also a very important idea. That if, for example, imagine there was a civil litigation, two cars came in and they had a crash. Even if you thought it felt better to punish one person beyond what the law itself said, no court should allow that to happen, right? Even if the driver of the car was a mean, terrible person and really was not behaving right, if he didn't commit a certain level of crime, then he's just going to pay a minimum penalty and walk away scot-free, we may feel, but that is what the law is. And adhering to the law is the first foundation of having a just society. And even when it goes against our gut. And that is because when we follow our gut, and only our gut, we usually end up murdering people. Or at the very least, beating them up and robbing them of stuff. Which is what justice is if you're not actually following the law, right? If the government says, I don't like you because you're Jewish, or because you're a different color, or because you're a foreigner, and therefore we're not going to give you the same rights, we're not going to listen to your arguments, we're not going to give you the same protections. Instead, we're going to beat you up and take your stuff. That would be a problem. I think all of us would agree. And what this is saying is that also works not just when it's a tyrannical government, but even a peaceful and good and nice government has to have the right justification before they take your stuff as a penalty. And that may be giving a criminal a break in a sense, but it also means that our first allegiance is to the Torah, even if it means we don't punish them as much as we want. Because we can only punish them as much as the law says we can. And that's why, reading very carefully, the rabbi said, if he didn't actually sell it all, then he didn't go over that threshold that the Torah was talking about. All right, now let's get into a little bit more complicated halves this, halves that.
Now, this is point two.
Point two, yes.
What I'm about to read is going to be if he's liable for 4 or 5-fold restitution.
Exactly. So this is
right. Not the 2-fold. This it's 4 or 5 times.
Right. So what Hayden is trying to point out is that for the coming A plus B scenarios that we're about to hit, the conclusion is he is liable for the 4 or 5 time restitution. But we're going to go through each of them to figure out why this would be a question.
So if he stole it in the owner's domain, but slaughtered it or sold it outside the owner's domain.
Right, so that might be something that we would consider the standard stealing activity, right? The standard stealing procedure is I sneak into your yard, I pick up your sheep, and I take your sheep out, and then I sell your sheep to someone else, right? That's sort of the normal thing, and that would be like, bam, 4 or 5 times. You're definitely, the full-on thief that we're talking about here. But
or if he stole it outside the owner's domain and slaughtered or sold it within the owner's domain.
Right. So now this, you got to think more than just your backyard, but think instead like, the old days of ranches, or big pasture lands. So that's all my property. And there's some guy who's just over the hill in the back, and one of my sheep wandered away, right? And he found it, brought it back over into my property line, and he's pretending like he's one of my workers. And some guy walks by and says, yeah, Farmer Bob asked me to sell these sheep, and he wants to sell them quick. And so I'm selling it from Farmer Bob's property. Yeah. Well, does that count as real theft? Because I haven't actually removed it from your property. It removed itself from the property, right? The sheep wasn't on your domain when I picked it up. And I brought it back to your domain, and now I'm selling it. So does that really count? And the spoiler alert, the answer is yes, that still counts. You're up for the 4 or 5 times penalty. right? Even though you didn't remove it from the property, but still took it into the, you hit the threshold. Likewise.
If he stole it and slaughtered or sold it outside the owner's domain.
I think you skipped B.
Did I skip B?
Yeah.
B is if he stole it and slaughtered it or sold it within the owner's domain.
Right. So this is, I come into your backyard or your back, farm, and I pick up the sheep and I sell it on the domain. Then am I responsible? Am I liable for the 4 or 5 times? You bet your bottom dollar. Now this one is a little bit more ambiguous, which is why they have to spell it out. Because one of the main tripwires for theft is removing the animal from the owner's property, right? I mean, otherwise, if I walk into someone's backyard and I pick up a sheep and I walk 10 feet and I put the sheep down still inside his yard, did I steal the sheep?
No.
No, I didn't steal the sheep. If I pick up the sheep, I walk 10 feet and I sell you the sheep and you walk over the property line, hey, I never walked over the property line, right? Clever man. Or I just kill the sheep and sell the meat, and I never walk over the property line with the meat, just with the pocket full of cash. And the Mishnah is saying, that is still considered to be the full crime of stealing and slaughter/sell, right? Even though you didn't physically carry the animal over the line, you caused it in your actions to be done in that way, and therefore you are fully responsible. But you can see, criminals have been clever for a long time.
I think in ways we never would come up with.
It's the ultimate loophole, right?
Yeah, right.
Or C.
Or if he stole it and slaughtered or sold it outside the owner's domain.
Right. This is, hey, your sheep was out wandering in the field beyond your property, and I took it and I sold it out there. I never removed it from your property.
I never even knew it was yours.
But I knew it wasn't mine. I may not have known whose it was, but I knew that it certainly wasn't my own. But I didn't physically remove it from the property there, and I didn't remove the stolen, the gain from the stolen property, off their property. But still, yes, the Mishnah says, you are responsible, as D reminds us.
4-fold or 5-fold restitution.
Right. For all of those cases, you have hit that threshold. It doesn't matter that you're doing a little, geography hanky-panky. You are still responsible. All right. Part E.
But if he stole it and slaughtered or sold it within the owner's domain, he is exempt.
Right. So if it was, hold on a second.
That makes no sense.
No, that one, just a second.
I'm trying to see which matched with this. If he stole it in the domain, he sold it.
That doesn't fit with.
That's the same as B.
It's
He stole it.
That's the same as B, yes. So hold on a
Same as B.
second.
okay.
Exactly
All right,
same as B.
hold on. I got to look this up of what the distinction is in the original. That's the one problem with this translation is it doesn't come with the original. So I've got to look it up. Please bear with me. We are experiencing technical difficulties. Bava Kamma, and we are in chapter 7, and Mishnah 5. What's going on here? No. What? That, hold on a second. Do we have any commentary on this? Because I have to admit, I did not notice that particular issue there.
We just have to figure out what is needed to exempt.
If that's the first case, right? Or isn't, we may have to put this on hold and come back to that, because that's not, I'm not seeing the distinction very quickly.
In
Yep.
my book,
How does it read?
it looks different. It says if he stole it
Right?
or slaughtered or sold it outside their domain,
Right?
is paying 4 or 5 times.
Right?
But if he stole it or slaughtered it or sold it in their domain, then is patur.
But how does it do part? But how does it do the part B part? The second clause.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Right.
Now I see. That's a contradiction here.
Very much.
Okay, so if he stole within the domain, and then he slaughtered it or sold it outside the domain, or he stole it outside. Sorry, he stole it within the domain and slaughtered it and sold it within the domain. That reads the same.
Does it say everything? When is he exempt from? I don't need the answer to the question.
What's that?
If it says in the book,
No, no.
which way is he exempt? That's the answer.
גנב ברשות הבעלים דבר הנקרא חוץ מרשותה, או שגנב חוץ מרשותה ברשותה. Yeah, it's all right. I'll have to look this up later, because this, yeah, it's just not it's not reading right, because those two should not be exactly the same. If they are, if he stole it and slaughtered or sold it within the owner's domain, he is exempt. Or if he stole it and slaughtered or sold it within the owner's domain, he must make 4 or 5. I mean, I'm not crazy, but those sentences sound exactly the same to me.
Exactly.
Yes. E is a combination of B and C.
Yeah. Okay, we'll have to come back to that. I'll do a little bit more research on that. All right, let's move on to Mishnah 6 then. All right, so in Mishnah 6, we're going to be lifting and pulling. So these are two different forms of kinyan, of acquiring things in Judaism. When you lift something and walk with it, you are acquiring it. If you are pulling it, leading the animal, because you can't lift the bull, you are also acquiring it. So the question then becomes, at what point did you acquire or not acquire the animal? Because that may make a difference for when you became a thief or didn't become a thief. Make sense? Okay, so that's our preamble. Let's see Mishnah 6.
Mishnah 6.1 is, if while he was dragging a sheep or ox out, if he was dragging it out, it died in the owner's domain, he is exempt.
Right?
So he was dragging it out of the owner's domain,
Right?
then he's exempt.
Right. What's that?
You said I didn't
He
steal it.
didn't, I didn't steal it, I just was
Actually, he was
walking
trying
it
to,
around.
Right.
No, you
well, he was
know.
trying to drag
Well.
it out, but he didn't make it. It died within the domain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he's not considered a thief,
The thief.
right? He's still liable for the damage he did to your animal, but he's not a thief,
But it would
But
be the
it's
3 or the
a
4.
different
or even
issue,
double. Right.
Because maybe he didn't cause the death. Maybe they
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Right? It's still, yeah, he was doing something he shouldn't have been doing, but he didn't meet the threshold of being defined as a thief.
He didn't actually drag it out, and then he'll say, I wasn't meaning to drag it out.
However, we're going to see in part 1A,
But if he had lifted it or taken it out of the owner's domain and it died, he is liable.
right? So lifting shows a level of acquiring or intent to acquire, because you can't legally acquire it if you're a thief. And once you've taken it across the property line,
Right.
dragging or lifting, then definitely you are liable as a thief when the animal dies. I mean, you're not just liable for the animal's death, you're liable as a thief and the double payment that would go with it. Part 2,
Part 2, if he brought it as the firstborn offering for his son, or gave it to his creditor, or to an unpaid guardian, or to a borrower, or to a paid guardian, or to a hirer, and one of them was dragging it away, and it died in the owner's domain, he is exempt.
all right. So again, we're talking about who counts, what counts as actual theft. So he was using it and he brought it, come on, sheepy, come here, right? Not lifting it, but just bringing it over and saying, use this to pay for my debt or for something else, right? And they went, oh, okay. And they scoop it up and they go and it dies and it's still inside the owner's domain. It doesn't count as theft. It was potential theft. There was certainly intent to be theft, but they didn't cross that threshold and he didn't lift it up, nor do we say that the person who he was cheating by trying to give the stolen, well, semi-stolen animal, that we don't consider them to be a thief either, since presumably they are unaware of the deception that's going on here. Right.
So none of this is from the owner's point of view, who has lost the animal. None of this is, we don't care about the owner.
Of course we care about the owner.
Not a bit.
But what?
He's not liable for killing your sheep.
No, he's
Yeah.
liable for killing,
Yeah.
but he's not liable for stealing. So look,
He said
hold
he's
on.
exempt. What is he
Let's
exempt
put it this way, right? Let's imagine there is some real no good neighbor who just likes playing around with his bow and arrow, right? And he's sitting in his yard one day and he sees one of your sheep run by and he kills one of your sheep, right? How much does he have to pay you back?
Depends where the sheep
You
was
said
killed.
it's a
No, on
private domain.
the guy's domain. In the
Why?
original owners, no, it's not theft.
He's exempt.
I just pay the damage that I did.
Oh,
If I knock over your wall, how much do I have to pay? Enough to fix your wall, right? I have to pay the penalty of actually fixing the damage that I caused. If I hurt a person, there are lots of other penalties that go along with that. And God willing, eventually someday we'll study that section. But if I just cause raw damage to your property, I am not going to be penalized the same way as if I'm stealing from your property. Dealing with here is that you've just caused raw damage. You didn't meet the threshold of theft. So I still have to compensate you for the damage I've done, but I don't get doubly or quadruple or quintuple penalized as a thief.
This was who's going to be liable for double the penalty. And you're saying that my animal is dead and you're not liable for double. What are
Right.
you liable for?
I'm liable for the
Just
actual
the
animal,
cost.
the actual cost.
Honey,
Not double.
That's a good question.
Right. I mean, but why would I be? I didn't commit theft. All right, let's take a different example, right? Let's have a modern. Let's put this in some modern context, right? Modern context. I am walking through the Apple store, right? And they've got a lovely little new iPhone on display, and I take the iPhone, and I go to slip it in my pocket to steal it, and I miss my pocket, and it falls and breaks on the ground. Am I a shoplifter?
No,
No,
you didn't walk
but I
away.
wanted to steal it,
But you didn't walk away.
but I didn't walk off the property, right? And I can't be prosecuted as a shoplifter. How much do I owe them for the phone? whatever the price of the phone is, right? For the damage that I caused to their property. I'm responsible for that, but I'm not going to have to pay any additional theft penalties because I didn't succeed in my theft. and that means that I'm not an actual thief. I'm a wannabe thief.
But I don't want you in the shopping center again.
Oh, that's fine. You can keep me out of your shop. No problem.
Because you're not, how can I keep you out of the shopping center?
Well, we always have the right to refuse service to people. I mean, if someone comes in,
shopping center.
No.
In order to do that, I have to prosecute you as a thief.
oh,
Or
for the whole shopping center as a whole, maybe that's a little bit harder. But my own little, mom and pop shop, I can decide if I don't want to take checks from you. I can decide if I don't like you, that you don't want you shopping.
So if I come into your garage,
Yeah.
I manage to start your car,
Mhm.
and I come up, and I'm planning to take the car out, but darn, instead of putting it in reverse to back it out, I go forward, I crash your car into your house.
Yes. You're paying me a whole lot of damages and the house,
But I'm not a thief.
but you're not a thief.
I'm not a thief.
No, because you're not a thief.
No.
You're a failed thief.
I just crashed your car on your domain, but it was your domain, so I never got it off your domain.
Right.
So
If you didn't commit the crime, but you're exempt from, but you're exempt from thievery. I mean, again, the definition is what is given to us by Torah.
I didn't complete the theft.
Right.
Because I didn't actually get it.
Right. You were a failure as a thief. I mean, it's like you see those videos sometimes from the security camera where
Yes.
thieves are trying to break in and they're coming through the ceiling and they fall and and they smack themselves and all of that. They don't actually steal anything, right? They're not actually thieves. Now in America we have special rules about breaking and entering,
That's right.
regardless of whether you actually steal something. And there are special rules in Torah as well about someone breaking into your house in the middle of the night, that you are allowed to use lethal force to stop them. Because if they break in the middle of the night, they're prepared to use lethal force to stop you. And so therefore you're allowed. But during the day, you're not, right? If someone tries to break into your house in the middle of the day, you can't shoot first and ask questions later. If you know that they're armed, if you can see they're dangerous, then yes. But if they're not, chances were they didn't expect anyone to be home. They weren't looking for causing violence. They were just looking for a quick steal. And we're not allowed to protect property at the expense of human life. Okay. And then part A?
Part A, now, if this, we're talking about, I was going to give this to my creditor or to an unpaid guardian.
Exactly.
If one of those people had lifted it up and taken it outside the owner's domain, then he is liable.
Right. Now, again, who is the liable here? It's not the guy who picked it up and took it innocently. It's the original thief. Right, the original thief. So if he lifts it up and says, thank you, the thief is now liable as a proper thief, it's not a failed thief anymore. He's a successful thief. Of course, all of this is contingent on us being able to catch him. And then he is.
So if the creditor takes it, but it dies in the owner's domain, then he's not liable.
No, because when the creditor lifts it, it shows that he has acquired it, which is a transfer of property, which means the original person was acting as though it was his property, which means it now has been a full unit of theft.
But if the creditor takes it outside the domain,
Right.
now it is liable. That's
Even if he didn't lift it up, just leaving the domain is enough. Yes.
Yeah, so he's liable in both cases. So,
Exactly. Okay. And now we're going to.
Although the first case, it says he's exempt. If it died in the owner's domain, he is exempt, even if they lifted it up. The second,
Not
number two,
just a
if they're
second.
dragging away and died in the owner's,
The dragging. Right.
he's exempt.
Right.
The creditor, the unpaid guardian, in the owner's domain, the thief is exempt.
Right. Because it was dragging, not lifting.
But if they lifted it and took it outside the owner's domain,
Right.
now he is liable.
Exactly. Or if you dragged it outside. Right. If you drag it outside the domain.
If the thief drags it outside, that's
Exactly. And if you lift it even inside the domain, you're liable. Right? Lifting is a different level of acquisition. Lifting is removing it from the domain immediately, simply by lifting it. Right? Think of it like, once the animal's hooves are off the ground, it's in a whole new world. It takes possession immediately, whereas dragging takes possession when you cross the border. So dragging, you've got a little bit more of a buffer zone. Okay, chapter 7, Mishnah 7. Totally new topic.
Oh, okay. Maybe this will be easier to understand.
Probably. I think
Okay.
I think it will be.
Point 1. It is forbidden to rear small herd animals in the land of Israel, but it is permitted to rear them in Syria or in the wildernesses of the land of Israel?
All right, so this, we're not going to get into the whole definition of exactly what they mean by land of Israel or non-land of Israel, because there were different zones of what we consider to be the land of Israel that were considered primary and secondary. But what they're talking about is in the primary zones of the land of Israel, raising small herd animals like goats and sheep was really destructive, right? The common, open pasture lands would just be mowed to dirt by these animals. Anybody who's ever seen the old Western movies about the fights between the cattle ranchers and the sheep herders, no, am I the only person who watched these old movies? I'm looking around and everyone's like, what are you talking about, Ralph? In the old movies, they'd often have fights between the sheep herders and the cattle ranchers, because the cows, when they eat only the top of the grass. But when the sheep and the goat eat, they eat everything down to the dirt. And so it's very destructive. And you can, clear cut an entire area, and now it's not good for anything. And so that's what this first Mishnah is basically saying, which is if you raise these animals in the best of the land, the good parts, then you are destroying the quality of the land for the rest of us. So if you want to raise them, do them outside of the main good parts of the land, either in the wilderness areas or across the border, even outside the primary zone of what we consider the land of Israel.
So if you wanted to have a herd of goats so that you would have milk,
yep,
you cannot do that on your farm here.
As a herd, Israel. Correct.
Oh, as a herd.
You can have a few, but you're not grazing them out there, right? I don't know exactly off the top of my head what the technical definition would be. But one of the reasons why this comes here is because, in a sense, what we're talking about in this first few, and then we're just going to get into a sort of common theme, but the first few is the idea that to do so would be stealing from everyone, right? If you bring an animal that is an environmental nuisance to the entire community and it's destroying the public common land, then you're taking the good of the land for your own animals, and that's stealing it from the rest of us, who we all have a share in the land. It's the inheritance of the whole children of Israel, not just you and your goats. So you're not allowed to suck out the goodness of the land and stick it in your goats only for your benefit. That goodness of the land has to be shared by all of us because it's common property. Make sense? Okay. Onward.
2, it is forbidden to rear fowls in Jerusalem because of the holy things, nor may priests rear them anywhere in the land of Israel because of the laws concerning clean food.
All right, so fowl, these types of like game birds and other things, they're pretty filthy. I mean, you probably have heard people talk about pigeons as like flying rats, and they're not far off. A lot of birds will eat anything you let them eat. And they'll poke through garbage and dead food, dead animals, and they will get their feet and their beaks completely filthy. And if you have things that need to be brought to the altar of Jerusalem in a state of sanctity, having these birds spreading that kind of filth around is a problem. Because how do I know that that your bird isn't going to land on my cow that's going to Jerusalem? And God forbid if I'm actually a priest, how can I raise these animals which could be bringing back God knows what into my domain when I have a higher degree of responsibility of remaining ritually pure? And so, you know what? We just keep them away. Keep them away. They're too dangerous for the community with regards to sanctity because of the way they behave. And then part 3 should not be a surprise.
It is forbidden to rear pigs anywhere.
Right? Jews don't raise pigs. Right? We don't raise pigs.
Right.
Now, that's a little bit of a surprise because we are allowed to raise, for example, camels, and we are allowed to raise horses, which
they're not being eaten.
Right. Camel, absolutely. Lots of people eat camels, and many people also eat horses. So, I mean, there are many parts of the world today where camel is eaten quite commonly, and there are many parts of the world where horse is eaten, not too unusually. I know France, it's still quite common. And likewise, what? French eat everything, yes. And likewise, right, and likewise dogs, which we're going to read about in just a minute, are also raised in some places for food. So it's not just a question of, well, pigs aren't kosher. There's a special feel around horses, around pigs. Like you said, that they're not used for anything else except eating. There's no other benefit for a pig except bacon. That is not. Horses and camels, you do technically have other reasons why you would have them.
A car, it's much better to get on a horse to go miles.
Even better to be on a camel.
So no, I've never been on Israel, but it's no pig, no way.
As far as I know, I have never seen pig farms while I've been there.
Nothing.
I don't know that it's illegal, but I don't know for I can't swear that there are no pigs.
Business. You could raise pigs, but what are you going to do with them if people don't eat them?
Yeah, but I just.
Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, let's be.
They don't have.
I didn't see any bacon shops.
Right.
How you know?
Right. And
and
remember as well that there are a sizable number of people in Israel who are neither Muslim nor Jewish, who can and do eat pork. So
Yes.
I wouldn't be surprised if they kept pigs for themselves. Why would the Christian Israelis avoid bacon? They can have bacon. That's perfectly legal for them.
Yeah, if I owned a business, I'd want one where I would sell my products off the shelves, not where it sits for a long time. They're waiting for the only two people in town who would eat it to buy it. It's not good business.
Sometimes I think that's what happens with kosher stores here.
Yeah.
Is we don't get enough people supporting the local kosher markets, which means go out and buy more kosher food, people. All right, and then, like I said, now that we're sort of just on a roll of what kind of animals can you or can't you raise, we're going to come to another animal as well.
Point 4 is very interesting that they would even talk about dogs. I don't recall dogs ever being mentioned historically.
They're in the Torah.
They're in the Torah.
Read number 4, and then we'll talk about
Number 4
dogs.
says, one should not rear a dog unless it is tied with a chain. And down at the bottom, section 4, dogs can be a menace to society. And therefore, if one wishes to raise one, he must keep it properly leashed.
Okay.
I wish this were a rule every place in the United States as well.
So let's talk first about dogs in general.
Yeah.
Right. So dogs are mentioned in the Torah. Anyone know? Trivia question: where do dogs get mentioned? They get mentioned twice.
Oh, I think right on the Torah, because I know the.
Just in the Torah. I know they get mentioned
just on the 5 books.
just in the 5 books. Yeah.
I don't remember. I see just go to close the. They said it was. It's one.
Oh, like dogs.
Yeah.
You mean for Gideon for drinking from the river? Yeah. Right. But nope. This is actual dogs during the Exodus. It says that when we left, the dogs did not bark. That when the Egyptian dogs did not bark. The Egyptian dogs did not bark at us. And also, it says that the treif meat we can feed to our dogs. That we're allowed to feed that. What's that?
Just because of that.
And the Midrash says it's because they didn't bark at us when we left.
Where is that one at?
Well, the Exodus is the Exodus, and the giving the treif is in Leviticus. I don't do chapter verse.
So trade food is a reward?
Oh, well, yeah.
Okay.
You know?
But you make it a reward. I would have thought that. Say, to honor the dog, don't feed him tray, feed him something.
Or, but the dog itself is treif. That's why we don't eat dogs.
Well, we don't eat people either because we're treif.
I don't have a cloven hoof. I don't chew my cud. But what about the Mishnah itself, right? That you shouldn't raise dogs unless it's tied with a chain. This gets...
it says you shouldn't even have a dog. Not even raising them. I mean, you shouldn't have one, not a herd of dogs, not anything, unless you tie it up.
Yes.
Don't have one.
Well, and so this goes back to, first of all, what dogs were in the ancient world compared to what dogs are now. Right? Dogs in the ancient world earned their keep. Right? You didn't have pets. I mean, you didn't keep a dog because it was cute. You didn't keep a dog because it was a good companion. It might be a good companion, nothing wrong with that. But the dog worked. And the dog worked as a shepherd, as a sheepdog, or the dog worked as a guard dog.
A guard dog that's tied up isn't much of a guard.
Well, yes and no. But a guard dog that's not tied up is absolutely a menace to everyone else around it.
Will you please tell the rest of the world that? Thank you very much. I am terrified of dogs. Okay, one time somebody brought a dog into this room. I don't remember. I was up on top of the couch getting out of here because people don't realize how dangerous a dog can be. This I really like. Dogs. My mother taught me not to be afraid of dogs.
Right.
And the way she did, she was brought up in Poland. She knew what it meant when she was out there and a dog was barking. It was not a good thing. So when we'd be in the middle of New York City and a dog would go by, she'd grab onto my arm and she'd stand still and don't move and the dog won't hurt you. Just don't move. Okay, now the dog, all right, now you can let go. So that's what I would do. I didn't want to teach that to my children. So I was walking with my 2 little girls on the street, up my street, and there was a neighbor 2 doors down, who I had known for a couple of years already, and her little beagle was sitting outside. And so my 3-year-old and my 1.5-year-old walked over. The little 1.5-year-old reached out to pat the beagle on the head, and it turned and bit her face up. The dog that I knew, never bit anybody before or after.
Right.
I'm telling you, reaching up that dog is a good idea. People think their dogs are like, wonderful. If it's yours, but not if a stranger comes by.
No, I mean, you have to always be careful with animals, of all types.
But
Yes.
I am so impressed that this is here because it's a very good rule.
Right. Now, this does get tempered if you live on the borderlands where the bandits are. Then you were allowed to leave your dog off the leash
I could see that would make
because
sense.
you needed it to be
That's right.
protecting in a bigger area and for more
Right.
aggressive out there. But
Yes.
they knew that dogs were absolutely used as a kind of weapon. And in fact, the Mishnayot that deal with dogs and the Talmud discussions are often used in modern Jewish thinking when we talk about gun legislation, about what does it mean to have something which is potentially harmful but also potentially beneficial within your household. How do you balance the community needs as well as the personal needs? And that's a whole other conversation. But this is one of the pieces that gets brought in of you're allowed to have something that is potentially dangerous, but it has to be under control as being sort of a foundational idea. And it's not just about dogs, but anything that if it's potentially dangerous, you have to be sure that it's under control because it's not just yourself that you're putting in danger; it's everything else around you.
Right.
And just there's a wonderful joke that I remember from the Big Book of Jewish Humor, which I don't know if in your day, but in my day that was a standard bar mitzvah gift. Everybody got at least one copy of the Big Book of Jewish Humor. I don't see it so much anymore, but it was a lot of fun. And there's a great joke about a Jewish spy during World War II, and he comes back to General Patton, and General Patton says, "So what does the enemy's line look like? What are we up against?" And he says, "General, it's terrible." And he says, "Well, tell me what it is. I have to prepare." And he says, "Well, first I'll give you the good news." He says, on their right flank, they've got 100 tanks. Patton says, "Oh no," he says, no, it's okay. We'll send in our fighters. They'll bomb them. It'll be fine." And he's like, all right, well, we can do that. Yes. And he gives the order. He says, what about on the left flank? And he says, the left flank, they've got thousands of infantry. And he's like, oh no, what are we going to do? He's like, no, General, it's okay. We'll send in our tanks. We'll roll right over them. And he's like, all right, but what about the center of their line? He's like, oh no, General, I can't say. He's no, I got to know. What's the center? And he's like, General, in the center, they've got such a big dog.
Oh my God.
Tanks, infantry, no problem. But the big dog.
You see the pictures of the dogs in the concentration camps that the Nazis had. Those were terrifying things.
That's.
Oh, I love that story.
You never heard that joke before? I thought for sure you'd know that one. All right. Last line.
It is forbidden to set snares for pigeons unless it be 30 priests from an inhabited place.
Which is about 4 miles. And the issue here is that pigeons were kept by people and they would let the pigeons out, the pigeons would eat, the pigeons would come back home, right? And then that person owned those pigeons, but they didn't let their pigeons, on a leash. They expected their pigeons to come back. So if you're setting traps inside the area where other people's animals are moving around, then you're going to be stealing their pigeons. And then there's no way to know whose pigeon it is. You can say, well, I thought it was a wild. And so it's just better not to even have the traps inside that populated area. Just go out in the forest. And if this guy's pigeons have flown out in the forest, then you're right. There's no way to make sure, but it's okay. It's fair game. But if it's inside the habited area, then don't be setting your traps because your chances are you're going to be stealing someone else's pigeon. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. We will continue with the next chapter next week.
Yeah.